Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. For those of you who've been watching my videos for any amount of time, you'll know that one thing that always crosses my mind when I'm watching an entry in a long-running series is continuity. Like how these films connect, how individual moments mesh together, if there's anything that's like, wait a minute. Now, if the film is entertaining, I can ignore certain breaches of continuity, even though my mind will be thinking, like, how does that reconcile with that? Ever since I was a kid, that part has been popping up. If there's one series that is a good example of both points, it is Fox's X-Men series. It has highs and it has lows, but it's a series I do enjoy, even though at press time I have still not watched Dark Phoenix or I forget the other name of the other one. Down the road, I'll watch them. And I have not revisited Apocalypse since the theater, even though the Blu-ray is in that drawer over there. Now, X-Men, they were keeping good continuity at first. Although people could argue that maybe the Wolverine film did break with it a little bit. But it wasn't until 2011 when we got X-Men First Class that we really got our first breach of continuity. That film was still good, but the breach of continuity has people scratching their heads. Now back then, I did a video trying to wrap my head around several plot points. And that's the video up there, X-Men Films and Continuity. Now, since this time, there's been a lot of people doing videos about the continuity of the X-Men series. But I felt it was time to put back up my old one. Now, note that in retrospect, some of this that I say probably is like, yeah, that's probably not what they were going for. Yeah, it's like they're probably trying to make the best film they can and not worry too much about continuity. Although us fans that really pay attention to it will be like, wait a moment. Some of my little guesses about why certain things are now, you could probably also just take tongue in cheek. But there's also some seriousness about it as I'm pointing them out. Like one of them is going to be how Mystique goes in First Class to how she is in the first X-Men series film, involving her little interaction with Xavier. But I'm going to leave myself from over a decade ago to discuss that. Here it is, my video of the X-Men series and continuity. Enjoy, everyone.
Hey guys, this is Mario coming at you with the final video in my X-Men series. I've reviewed all the films. Now I bet you're wondering, Mario, you reviewed all the films. What else could there be to cover in this series? Well, after watching the movies, and this was actually first pointed out to me by my good friend Brandon when we were talking one night on Skype. It was before I saw X-Men 3, so I believe it was right before I went and saw First Class, but he mentioned something about a discrepancy between First Class and the other movies that I checked out, and I noticed that he was correct. And so, as I rewatched the other movies, I looked for continuity errors and stuff, which is what this is about, because I watched First Class before I rewatched the rest of the movies, and I did notice that there are a couple of them. Some of them could be considered retcons, some of them could be considered fucked up. Now, I actually did take a few notes. As you can see, there's a couple notes. I just did quick notes, and some of them I'll elaborate on. But okay, I'm going to start off with the simplest one. Storm. In X-Men First Class, Storm has a minor cameo in one scene, but this does not jive with how old she is in the original 3 films. Because in that one scene, which is supposed to be set like, I believe, 61, somewhere around then, she looks like she's about 6 or 7. Which, if that was the early 60s, that would not jive with how old she looks. I mean, Wolverine not aging, we know is part of his mutation, but Storm, unless of course they're trying to say Storm's older than she looks like Wolverine, which I think that they did that in the 90s show, but it's been forever since I've seen the 90s show, but I think that in that show she was like in her 40s or something, while in the movie she looks like she's in her 30s, so maybe part of her power is she ages slower too. But when they were gonna do that in X-Men Origins Wolverine, I thought that would have been a little bit more appropriate, because It's in the deleted scenes section. I don't know why they ended up putting it on the cutting room floor, but in that scene, it's set in Africa when they're in the village. That was supposed to be Storm's home village. The only reason you know it's her is because child in Africa with the white hair in an X-Men movie. Who else could it be? Now, before I cover these next couple ones, I should cover this one. The relationship between Professor Xavier and Magneto. Now, as we could tell, they're friends. Even if in the original trilogy, you could tell they're friends. But Magneto, he doesn't really show it. You could tell he just from some of his words that he's friends with him, but he doesn't really show that he really considers Charles a friend until after he gets killed by Jean. And of course, you could always tell the Professor considers Magneto a friend. And as I mentioned in my review of X-Men First Class, that movie shows how these two became friends. But there are discrepancies. Number one, the age in the first film that Professor X tells Wolverine he met Eric at was age 17. Yet in First Class, they seem to be in their early teens. I mean, not early teens, excuse me. Early 20s, that's what I meant. Early to mid-20s. Now, of course, one way to get around that is that at that point they don't say a specific year for when they meet, and Charles could just be so smart that he earned his professor thing earlier than most people would, which I would buy that, especially with his power. So I would buy that maybe they are supposed to be 17, even though they're played by actors who are in their 30s. They do that a lot, but for all intents and purposes, I'm guessing they're supposed to be in their mid-20s. Another thing is with how long their relationship lasts. While the first film does not give a specific length of time that their relationship lasts at the school, and neither does the second film, it's the third film that really fills that in with that thing at the beginning where they go and visit Jean and stuff and bring her to the school. And that scene is supposed to be sometime in the 80s. Yet in First Class it shows that they have a falling out and they leave each other, and Eric becomes Magneto in 62. Now, it took me a little bit to figure this one out, and I actually came up with it one day when I was talking with Jeff. And that is, maybe this is what they're trying to go with. Maybe that scene is kind of like the scene that we see later on where they go to Jean's house. They both go in there with their own agendas, but then they decide to meet and just, do what's best for her. And at that time, Magneto thinks the best thing for her would be to learn how to control her powers from another person who has the same type of power. Because he doesn't have that psychic power mutation, Charles does, so who better than to help her control it than someone who has the same power? And of course, maybe Emma Frost is gone by that point and he can't have her out. But then again, that'd just be a retcon of it from how we've seen it. And also, there's another little problem with that scene that it introduces, along with Professor X's cameo in X-Men Origins Wolverine. He's walking while bald, and yet at the end of First Class, he's put in the wheelchair, and he still has hair. Now, in Wolverine, it's easier to explain that scene. The Professor's psychic, so therefore, he probably knows all the battles and stuff that's going on the island. When he lands, he uses his powers to send an astral projection of himself out there. Just trust me, that'd probably be easier than trying to get a wheelchair up and down that ramp, especially since it's a stair ramp. Then, of course, when they get inside, he tells them, "I'm sorry I did this, it was easier." Much makes more sense. Also, the fact that if you're going to go with that, it would also make sense why the astral projection does not open his mouth to talk. Now, of course, it gets harder when you're talking about the scene in X-Men 3, which we also see Charles walking. My only guess with that is that they're retconning that he was in the wheelchair during that scene, which I would go with that because it'd be kind of harder to do an astral projection for that one. So I'm saying that they're retconning he was in the wheelchair during that part. Okay, which brings up another thing, which kind of connects with them. Cerebro. In the first film, Charles tells Wolverine that Eric helped him design Cerebro. While in First Class, we see that it's Beast that made Cerebro. Now, I actually thought of a way to explain this while I was watching the first movie. I'm like, well, that might work. The original prototype for Cerebro was invented by Beast. But maybe the steps towards the final one we see in the first movie, maybe Charles saw that after they're forced to leave the military compound in X-Men First Class, he starts trying to figure out a way to improve upon Cerebro, and Eric helps him. It's just off screen. And then when he leaves, if they don't have a reconciliation at one point after that, maybe he fine-tunes the designs, or maybe he works from the design that him and Eric did, and eventually they get Cerebro, and Eric remembered Cerebro and how it worked. But for that to happen, they'd have to have finished with the planning, but not the building. So that's what my guess is, that they did the planning of the new model of Cerebro together, just that Eric left and then Charles built it. But Eric still remembered how to tamper with it. That's just my guess. And then, of course, that leads into another thing, Mystique. In the original films, Mystique and the Professor don't really have that much. They don't really talk that much. They talk less to each other than Mystique and Nightcrawler talk to each other. Of course, you can see that Mystique is loyal to Eric, which First Class does do a good job of showing how that loyalty comes and how Mystique turns into the woman she is in the first 3 films. Now, one thing we learn, of course, in First Class is that she is the adopted sister, well, not legally adopted, but basically, they adopted each other. They're basically brother and sister, her and the Professor, which I don't think was in any of the comics, but it's a nice little addition. Now, with that in mind, it makes you wonder if Mystique was worried when Charles got paralyzed in First Class and was going to stay with him until she was given the go-ahead by her brother to go with Magneto. Why would she put that stuff in Cerebro that basically put him into a coma? A lot of stuff happens to happen between those 2 films for that. My guess is that her loyalty to Magneto grew to such an extent that she would be willing to harm her own family for him when it comes to the cause for mutants. Of course, obviously, she's not going to kill him, but knock him out to get him out of the way, I guess. Which, while I'm on the subject of this, that brings up another little point. Apparently, in the first film, the Professor does not seem to know anything about the helmet that Magneto has. Yet we see that he gets it at the end of First Class. The design changed, that obvious. Maybe that one gets broken, he has to make a new one, or he just decides to make a new one based on his own stuff. That was a simple one to explain away. Since he's explaining it to Wolverine, he's probably just saying he developed a way. He's not going to tell him how, or maybe he suspects that he got rid of the helmet and tried something else. My guess is for that he's just explaining it to him, and also a lack of foresight on the writers. Remember, First Class was written by the same guys that wrote the first movie, from what I understand, so lack of foresight would probably be a better thing, but they probably went back at the first movie and probably looked through the dialogue. Okay, we got to figure out a way to make that fit. Aha! Stuff like that. Now, of course, also now this is only a little thing. Wolverine. Now, First Class does not retcon any of the events of X-Men Origins Wolverine out of continuity. We'd have to have another Wolverine movie to do that. But since it takes place 10 years before X-Men Origins Wolverine, like I mentioned in my review, it makes you wonder what exactly is Wolverine doing at that point. Because it's before the Vietnam War, and it's after the Korean War, so what could he be doing? Him and Sabretooth just probably doing random stuff. Maybe they're bounty hunters. Yeah, Logan the Bounty Hunter. That'd be a cool show. Yeah. I'm here for the bounty. Now that would be cool. Logan and Logan and Victor the Bounty Hunters. So that one is actually kind of easy since the movie takes place before Wolverine, so it doesn't really get it out of continuity, so that one was kind of easy to address. The Academy, now this one is a minor one, which, like I would say, probably due to lack of foresight. In the first movie, the Professor tells Wolverine that Jean and Scott were some of his first students. Yet we see in First Class that some of his first students were actually Banshee and other stuff. Now, what he probably means by that is some of his first students that, he actually taught, at the school. But of course, X-Men Origins Wolverine shows that that's not the case with Scott, and judging by the flashback we see in the third movie, that's not the case with Jean. Unless, of course, he didn't really have that many students before them, Wait a minute. I guess Scott's older than Jean. I just thought of another little error that the films might have done, and that would be that Scott looks like he's a teenager at the beginning of X-Men Origins Wolverine, which takes place about around the early '80s, late '70s, and yet Jean looks like she is only like 10, maybe around that same time period. I guess Scott's older. Simple explanation. That one wasn't even on the list. With the Academy, my guess is probably they were some of his first students that remained or something. I don't know. That one's kind of hard to explain, or maybe he was just telling Logan that for clarity. But obvious thing, lack of foresight. Anyway, that concludes this continuity review because that's all I can think of. If there's any other continuity things that you guys could think of, put them in the comment section. And now that the X-Men film series is done, I'm probably going to do a couple videos. Just stay tuned.